Chapter 1. The Diagnosis. The waters at Bath were, in Dr. Nathaniel Hale's considered medical opinion, largely useless. This was not a popular view in a city whose entire economy rested on the therapeutic reputation of its mineral springs, and he had learned in his first season of practice here to hold it with the discretion of a man who understands that truth and timing are separate professional considerations. He prescribed the waters. He accompanied patients to the pump room. He said yes. The sulfur content is quite remarkable, with a straightness of face that had taken some months to perfect. And then he returned to his consulting rooms in Gay Street and recorded, with meticulous honesty, what had actually improved and what had not. What improved in his observation was almost never the water. What improved was rest and removal from the exhausting performance of London life, and the permission which Bath's social structure, for all its absurdities, did genuinely provide, to be unwell without it being a moral failing. Patients came to Bath because it was acceptable to be here. They recovered because being somewhere acceptable gave them room to breathe. He was thinking about this on a Tuesday morning in March, when his next patient was shown in, and he understood within the first 90 seconds that she was thinking about almost exactly the same thing. She was perhaps 25, and she entered with the precise posture of a woman who had been taught that carriage was character, spine straight, chin level, eyes forward, and who had been performing that teaching for so long that it had become automatic, which meant that the very slight fatigue around her eyes and the very slight tension at the corners of her mouth were notable precisely because they had escaped the performance. She wore a pale grey morning dress that was expensive without being fashionable, and she was accompanied by a companion. Older, comfortable, the sort of woman who exists in Bath, drawing rooms in quantities suggesting they are produced somewhere locally, who settled into the chair by the door with the equanimity of someone who had accompanied a great many consultations. Lady Georgiana Fairfax, his housekeeper had said, with the slight elevation of tone that indicated a person of social consequence. Third daughter of Baron Whitfield, he recalled from the appointment letter. Referred by her family physician in Wiltshire, who had written that her ladyship suffered from nervous complaints of the chronic variety and would benefit from the Bath regime. "Lady Georgiana," he said, rising, "please sit." She sat with the same automaticity as her posture, the movement of a woman who has been told where to be and has long since stopped deliberating about it. She folded her hands in her lap, and he noted the hands, still, controlled, not the hands of someone genuinely unwell, but of someone who was managing. "Dr. Hale," she said. Her voice was clear and measured. "I understand you are to prescribe a course of treatment." "I am to assess whether one is warranted," he said, drawing his chair to the desk and opening his notes. "They are not the same thing. How long have you been in Bath?" "A fortnight." "And before that, were you in London?" "In Wiltshire, my family's estate." "You came directly from the estate to Bath, not via London?" A fractional pause. "Yes." "And the nervous complaints your physician described, are they of long standing or recent onset?" Another pause, finer than the first. He looked up from his notes and found her looking at him with an expression that was interesting. Not the resigned compliance of a patient who has been told what ails her and has accepted the verdict. Something more alert than that. Something almost like the look of a person who has been asked an unexpected question and is deciding how much of the true answer to give. "They are described as long-standing," she said carefully. He set down his pen. "Lady Georgiana, I am going to ask you several questions, and I would be grateful if you would answer them as honestly as you are able, rather than as you think I expect. It will save us considerable time." She looked at him steadily. "Very well." "Do you sleep?" "Yes." "Do you eat?" "Yes." "Do you experience palpitations, persistent headaches, dizziness, or unusual fatigue at rest?" "No, occasionally tired, but not at rest." Do you find the company of others distressing? Crowds, noise, social engagements? A longer pause. I find some company effortful, not distressing. What kind of company do you find effortful? She was quiet for a moment, that he let extend without filling. The companion by the door was occupied with needlework. The March light came through the consulting room window in the particular thin way of early spring, useful but not yet warm. Company in which I am expected to be a certain kind of person, Lady Georgiana said at last, and in which the expectation does not account for whether I am, in fact, that person. She said it with the care of someone who has located the exact truth and is now deciding whether to hand it over. Then she did. My family sent me here because I have been insufficiently myself, the self they require. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his pen, made a brief note, and set it down again. I see, he said. And what does the self they require consist of? Cheerfulness, she said, with a precision that was not bitter, but was exact. Agreeableness, readiness for the appropriate match, an absence of opinions that require defending. She looked at her folded hands. I have not been providing these things reliably, and my family's physician, who is a kind man but not a complicated thinker, diagnosed it as nerves. And is it nerves? She looked up. No. No, he agreed. It is not. He folded his hands on the desk, mirroring her without intending to, and said the thing he said once a week to someone in this room, and that was still, each time, a small professional act of courage. Lady Georgiana, you are entirely well. Physically and constitutionally, there is nothing wrong with you that a course of mineral waters will improve. I will not prescribe what would be, in effect, a cure for something you do not have. The room was very quiet. My family, she said slowly, expects a treatment program. I am aware. He looked at her steadily. I can provide you with a schedule that will satisfy the forms: regular attendance at the pump room, light exercise, restricted social engagements as medically advised. It will look like a regime. It will not do anything your own common sense, and a few weeks of rest would not do more efficiently. A pause. Alternatively, I can tell you that you are well, and suggest that the more useful question is what you would like to do with that fact. Lady Georgiana Fairfax looked at Dr. Nathaniel Hale across the consulting room desk, and something happened in her face, behind the posture and the managed expression and the careful performance of a woman presenting herself correctly, that he had seen before, in patients at the moment when they understood that they did not have to be what they were told they were. It was not relief, exactly. It was something more radical. The sensation of a door, long assumed locked, turning out to be merely closed. That, she said, is a very unusual prescription. I am a somewhat unusual physician. She was quiet for a moment. Then, what should I do with it? The fact that I am well? That, said Nathaniel, is entirely your decision. I am only qualified to assess the medical question. He pushed back his chair and stood, the consultations close. I would, however, recommend the afternoon lecture series at the assembly rooms: Natural Philosophy and Botanical Sciences, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The attendance is small and the topics are genuinely interesting. Several of my patients have found it useful for the nerves. The ghost of something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but the architecture from which one is built. Natural philosophy, she said. It has been known to clarify thinking, he said, in cases of excessive expectation. She rose, and her companion rose with her, and she gathered herself with the automatic competence of long practice. At the door, she turned. Thank you, Dr. Hale. You are the first physician I have consulted who has not told me what I am. It is not within my professional remit, he said, telling people what they are, only what they are not. She nodded once, precise, controlled, and went out. He stood at the window and watched her cross the street below with the same correct posture and the same managed expression, and thought, "But you are deciding something. I can see it from here." He made a note of the afternoon lectures and closed his appointment book and went on to the next patient, and did not permit himself to think about Lady Georgiana Fairfax again until the following Tuesday, when he arrived at the assembly rooms for the botanical science lecture and found her already there in the third row with a small notebook open on her knee. Chapter 2. The Prescription. She was not surprised to see him. This was the first thing he noticed, that she registered his arrival with recognition, and something that was not quite composure, because composure implies suppression, and this was more like the natural ease of someone who expected an outcome and has seen it confirmed. She moved one seat to the left to provide the aisle seat, which was a practical gesture and not a social one, and turned back to her notebook. He sat. The lecture had not yet begun. Around them, the small Tuesday audience settled into chairs, 8 or 10 people, mostly older, one young clergyman who appeared to be there by accident and was reconsidering his options. "You came," he said, which was not his most eloquent opening. "You recommended it." She did not look up from her notebook. "I generally act on good advice." "Provided it strikes you as good." "Provided it strikes me as good," she agreed. And this time there was the thing he had seen the beginnings of in the consulting room, the architecture of a smile, assembled from its components without quite committing to the whole. "I attended the Tuesday lecture last week as well, the natural philosophy. It was about the composition of mineral spring water." She paused. "Largely sulfur." "Yes," he said. "Remarkably effective cure, sulfur, from what I gather. Remarkably versatile attribution." The lecturer arrived, a small, bustling man named Mr. Pierce, who knew more about botany than anyone in Bath, and conveyed it with the enthusiasm of a person unaware that not everyone shared his passion, which was to say, he conveyed it excellently, and the lecture began, and they did not speak again for an hour. But he was aware of her beside him, the scratch of her pen in the notebook, the angle of her attention toward the diagrams Mr. Pierce produced, with the confidence of a man who believed all subjects were clarified by illustration, the point at which she wrote something down that made her pause, and then write something additional below it, apparently because the first observation had generated a second. He did not look at the notebook. He thought about looking at it for most of the second half of the lecture. Afterward, in the movement of the small audience toward the door, she fell into step beside him with the naturalness of two people who are both heading the same direction and have dispensed with the performance of coincidence. "He is wrong about Helleborus niger," she said. "He said it blooms in January in all conditions. It blooms in January in southern conditions. In Wiltshire we don't see it before February." "You have a garden." "I had a garden," she said. "It is technically my father's garden. I was the one who maintained the hellebore beds." A pause. "Among other things." They were on the pavement outside the assembly rooms in the March afternoon, cold still, but with the first credible suggestion that cold was not the permanent condition of the world, that somewhere beneath the grey sky a different season was accumulating itself. "Tell me about the other things," he said. She looked at him sideways. A look he was learning, over the few encounters they had accumulated, was the look she used when she was assessing whether a question was genuine or social. He looked back with what he hoped was evidence of the former. "The kitchen garden," she said. "I planned the plantings and supervised the forcing beds for 3 years, a correspondence with a botanist at Oxford about the propagation of certain native species. He sends cuttings, I send observations. A reading program that my mother once described as alarming in its ambition. The ghost of humour. Various opinions that I have learned to share judiciously." "And in London?" A shorter pause. In London, I was a baron's daughter of 25 who had refused 2 proposals and whose conversation at dinner was described by Lady Hepworth as unnecessarily effortful, presumably because I had argued with her son about the Corn Laws. She said this without self-pity, only accuracy. My family interpreted this as nerves. And you interpreted it as being myself, she said, which turned out to be the problem. They had stopped walking without apparently deciding to at the corner of Milsom Street, and he was aware that the conversation had moved into territory that was not medical and that this was his doing, his recommendation, his question, his Tuesday seat, and that he had not been unaware of what he was doing when he did it. He was a physician of moderate income and no social standing, the son of a Bath apothecary, educated on scholarship and maintained on merit. She was a baron's 3rd daughter with a family in Wiltshire and a social world in London that had opinions about what she should be and whom she should marry. He was not naive about the distance between those coordinates. He was also, standing at the corner of Milsom Street in the March wind, finding it difficult to care about coordinates. The kitchen garden in Wiltshire, he said, the hellebore beds and the forcing beds and the Oxford correspondence. Do you miss them? Every day. Simple, immediate. Then perhaps, he said carefully, the useful question is not what your family thinks is wrong with you, but how you arrange to return to what is right. She looked at him, the full, direct look, not the assessing sideways one. Her eyes were brown and clear and direct in a way he found. He was being honest with himself, standing at this corner, entirely absorbing. Are you prescribing, Dr. Hale? She said. Suggesting, he said. There is a distinction. She smiled, the whole architecture completed at last, an expression that was entirely genuine and therefore entirely different from the composed face she wore in the street. It lasted a moment. I shall think about it, she said, and went on down Milsom Street in the March wind, notebook under her arm, and he stood at the corner and thought, well, think about it carefully, Lady Georgiana, as will I. Chapter 3. The Complications. The complications arrived in the form of her mother. Lady Whitfield descended on Bath in the last week of March with the purposeful energy of a woman who had sent a daughter away to recover and had received reports of recovery so insufficient as to require personal investigation. She was accompanied by her elder daughter Cecilia, married, comfortable, and possessed of the charitable condescension of a woman who has made the expected choices and considers this wisdom. They installed themselves at the White Hart and called upon Georgiana before she had been informed of their arrival. Nathaniel learned this on Thursday morning at the lecture. She arrived late, which she never did, and sat not in the 3rd row but in the back, and the set of her shoulders had returned to the managed tension he had seen on their first meeting and had been watching over 3 weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays and 2 chance encounters at Mollen's pastry shop on Milsom Street gradually release. After the lecture, in the pavement moment they had established without formally establishing it, she said, My family has arrived. Yes, he said. He had suspected something from the shoulders. My mother wants a report from you. She looked at the middle distance. On the treatment program. What program would she like reported on? The ghost of the genuine smile. Something involving the waters and restricted social engagements and a great deal of rest. She is hoping to present it to my father as evidence that the Bath prescription is working and that I will be ready to return to London by May in a condition of improved agreeableness. The smile did not develop further. There is also a Mr. Ashford, not our Mrs. Ashford, whom she considers a suitable prospect, and whom she would like me to be agreeable toward by May. Nathaniel looked at the street. A carriage passed, and a pair of ladies with a small dog, and the ordinary traffic of a Bath morning. And what do you want? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. This was something he had noticed in her over the 3 weeks. the pause before the true answer, during which she appeared to be choosing between the reply that was expected and the reply that was real. The pauses had been getting shorter. "I want to go back to Wiltshire," she said, "not because my family sends me, but because I choose to the garden and the correspondence and the hellebore beds that need replanting this spring." A beat. "I want to go back as myself, on my own terms." "And Mr. Ashford?" "I have never met Mr. Ashford." Her voice was even. "He may be perfectly agreeable. He may have opinions about the corn laws. My mother's record in this area does not inspire confidence." Nathaniel kept his eyes on the street. He was aware of several things simultaneously: the professional distance he was obligated to maintain, the 3 weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays and Molland's pastry shop, the way she had shown him the notebook after the second lecture, the double entries, the first observation generating a second, with a matter-of-factness that suggested she had decided to trust him with a thing she did not show casually. He was aware that the professional distance and the 3 weeks were in direct conflict, and that he had been allowing the conflict to develop because he was a man who believed in evidence, and the evidence had been accumulating faster than his caution. "Your mother will call on me," he said. "Yes. I will tell her the truth, that you are entirely well." He paused. "What you tell her about your intentions is not my report to give." She turned to look at him. "You could tell her the treatment requires more time." "I could. It would be a lie, and I do not practice those, even by convenience." He met her eyes. "But there is something I can truthfully tell her, if you will permit it." She waited. "I can tell her that your recovery has been genuine, and that the conditions of it matter. That removal from a pressured social environment, with appropriate intellectual occupation, has been beneficial, and that a premature return to the same pressured conditions would be medically inadvisable." He held her gaze. "That is entirely true." Something in her face moved, not the smile, but something beneath the smile, the thing the smile was built from. "That is," she said, "very carefully worded." "I am a physician. I choose my words with clinical precision." "You are," she said, "a considerably better ally than I anticipated when I walked into your consulting room." The word ally landed between them. It was accurate, and it was also not quite sufficient, and they both knew it, and the morning traffic continued around them, and the March light did what March light does in Bath, suggesting warmth without entirely committing to it. "I should tell you something," he said. He said it with the care of a man who has been turning a sentence over for some days and has decided that continuing not to say it is its own kind of cowardice. "My interest in your situation is not purely professional. It has not been, I think, for some weeks. I want to be honest about that, because I think you would prefer the honesty, and because concealing it would be the kind of thing I have just said I do not practice." Lady Georgiana Fairfax stood in the March morning and looked at him. Her expression was the full, direct one, not the managed face, not the sideways assessment, but the one he had first seen when he told her she was entirely well, the expression of a door that is merely closed. "I know," she said. "I have known for some time." A pause, and something like wonder in it. It is a very strange thing, to be known clearly by someone, and to know them clearly in return, and to find it comfortable. She looked at the street. "I have not found it comfortable before." "No," he said, "neither have I." They stood at the corner of Milsom Street and said nothing further, because nothing further was required at this particular moment, and the March light continued its careful work. And somewhere in Wiltshire, a hellebore bed was waiting, and the distance between their coordinates seemed, standing here, considerably less definitive than it had appeared from his consulting room window 6 weeks ago. Lady Whitfield called on Thursday afternoon. She was a handsome, decisive woman in her 50s who had navigated the social world with sufficient success to believe that its rules were natural law, and she regarded Nathaniel across his consulting room desk with the careful eye of a woman assessing an instrument whose function she needed but whose maker she was not certain about. He told her, with complete honesty, that her daughter was entirely well. He told her that the recovery process had benefited from intellectual stimulation and the removal of social pressure, and that a premature return to conditions of the former kind would be medically counterproductive. He told her that Lady Georgiana had demonstrated, in his professional observation, a constitutional strength that required appropriate outlet rather than management. Lady Whitfield absorbed this. "She requires outlet," she repeated, in the tone of someone filing information in a category she had not previously opened. "Intellectual occupation," he said. "She is a woman of considerable capability. In my experience, considerable capability that goes unoccupied tends to manifest as what physicians call nervous complaints." A pause. "You are saying her nerves are caused by—" "I am saying that Lady Georgiana is entirely well, and that keeping her well requires certain conditions, chief among them, the freedom to use her own mind." He held her gaze with the evenness he used for difficult conversations. "She manages a garden of some complexity and maintains a botanical correspondence of academic quality. These are not the activities of a woman in poor health. They are the activities of a woman in excellent health who has been given insufficient room to exercise it." Lady Whitfield was quiet for a long moment. Something moved in her expression that was not capitulation, but might have been the beginning of a different kind of attention. A mother seeing, perhaps, a daughter she had been looking at for 25 years through a particular lens being offered a different one. "She refused 2 proposals," Lady Whitfield said, not accusation, closer to inquiry. "I am not acquainted with the gentleman," Nathaniel said carefully. "I can only say that a woman of Lady Georgiana's intellectual quality would not, in my assessment, be well served by a match that did not account for it." Lady Whitfield looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not entirely read. Then she said, "You are very forthcoming, Dr. Hale, for a consulting physician." "I believe in the accurate transmission of medical information," he said, and held her gaze. She left without committing to anything. He sat in his consulting room after she went and looked at his hands and thought about the coordinates and decided that the evidence, accumulated over 6 weeks of Tuesdays and Thursdays and corners of Milsom Street, had become sufficient. He wrote a letter that evening, not to Lady Whitfield, to Baron Whitfield in Wiltshire, whose name he had from the original referral letter, setting out his professional assessment of his daughter's health and the conditions of its maintenance, and adding, at the end, in a paragraph he wrote 4 times before he was satisfied with its honesty, a declaration of personal regard and a request for the opportunity to make his intentions clear. He sent it before he could revise it into cowardice. Then he went for a long walk beside the river in the dark, because being a man who believed in evidence was all very well, but evidence, when it pointed towards something you wanted, was still frightening. Chapter 4. The Garden. The reply from Baron Whitfield arrived in 9 days. It was brief and not discouraging, the language of a man who had been given information he had not previously held and required time to process it. He wrote that he had spoken with his daughter. He wrote that she had expressed opinions of her own on the subject, which he had not previously understood her to hold. He wrote that he would discuss the matter further at Easter when the family assembled at Wiltshire, and that he would be glad to receive Dr. Hale at that time. The language of "would be glad to receive" was, in Nathaniel's reading of it, the difference between an open door and a closed one. He read the letter 3 times, and then went to his next appointment because he was a physician and patients did not become less unwell because he was happy. He saw Georgiana at the Thursday lecture. She arrived already knowing her mother had apparently conveyed the substance of his letter, as mothers do, with editorial additions Nathaniel was not privy to, and she arrived with the full, genuine smile, not the ghost or the architecture, but the completed version, and it was so different from her face on their first meeting that he found himself stopped entirely in the act of standing to greet her. "You wrote to my father," she said. "Yes." Without knowing what he would say. "Yes." She sat down, third row, usual seat, his aisle seat already waiting, and opened her notebook and said to the page, "That was either very courageous or very impractical." "I could not determine which from the inside," he said honestly. "I sent it before I resolved the question." "My father," she said, "described you in his letter to my mother as refreshingly direct." "That is a charitable reading of impractical." She looked up from the notebook and looked at him, and the smile was still there, the whole architecture self-evident and unperformed. "I told him that I was not disposed to have the conversation at Easter," she said, "that I would rather have it now." He was very still. "He said I might use my own judgment." She turned back to her notebook. "Which is a thing he has not previously said, and which I suspect you had something to do with, and for which I am grateful." A pause. "Among other things." Mr. Pierce arrived at the front of the room with his illustrations and his botanical enthusiasm, and the lecture began, and they did not speak again for an hour. But the quality of the silence beside him had changed. It was full in a different way, weighted with the warmth of something decided rather than the anticipation of something approaching. And he spent much of Mr. Pierce's account of spring flowering cycles in a state of attention that was professionally inadequate and personally comprehensive. Afterward they walked, as they had developed the habit of walking, and the walk extended past Milsom Street and along the river, because neither of them turned back when they reached the corner, and neither of them mentioned it. The afternoon had become genuinely warm, the first warm afternoon of the year, the kind of April warmth that feels like a concession from a season that has been making you earn it. "Tell me about the garden," he said. "The one you want to go back to." She told him. She told him about the hellebore beds and the south-facing wall where the fruit trees were espaliered, and the cold frames she had built herself, with the carpenter's son who had been glad of the work, to extend the growing season. She told him about the kitchen garden's rotation and the arrangement she had made with the head gardener, a stubborn elderly man named Prewitt, who had initially considered her an interference and had eventually, over 2 seasons, come to regard her as an authority he consulted on matters he would not have admitted consulting a woman about. She told him about the Oxford correspondence and the botanist, Dr. Marsh, who had sent a cutting of a Himalayan primula that she had nursed through 2 winters and finally, this spring, convinced to bloom. She told him all of it with the ease of someone talking about a thing they love to someone they trust with it, and he listened with the attention he gave to things that required it, the full kind, the kind that notices what is said and what is beneath the saying. "When you return," he said, and not if, because the picture she was painting was so vivid and so certain that if would have been its own kind of dishonesty, the primula will be blooming. "If it hasn't been killed by a late frost." She said it without alarm. "Prewitt will have been watching it. He won't admit he cares, but he'll have been watching." "And the hellebore beds?" "Ready for replanting." She glanced at him sideways, the assessing look, but warmer. "You have been listening very carefully." "I generally do," he said. "It is professionally habitual." "Is that what this is?" Not a question. He stopped walking. They had reached a stretch of the river path that was, at this hour on a Thursday afternoon, empty, the willows bare at the edges of the bank, the water grey-green and moving with the patient continuity of water that does not concern itself with the particularities of human timing. "No," he said, "this is not professional habit." She stopped beside him and looked at the river, and he looked at her looking at it, the correct posture, the managed expression, and beneath both of them the person who argued about the corn laws and built cold frames with the carpenter's son and talked about hellebore beds with the ease of someone who had never been told to stop caring about them. "I am a physician's son," he said. "My practice is sound and my income is modest, and my position in society is considerably below yours. I am aware of the distance. I have been aware of it since your first consultation, and I have found, over the 10 weeks since then, that I cannot make myself care about it as much as I am supposed to." He looked at her directly. "I would like to court you, with your father's permission, which I have apparently begun to acquire, and with yours, which is the permission that matters." A pause. "I would like to know you beyond Bath and lectures and corners of Milsom Street. I would like to see the hellebore beds." She was quiet for a long moment beside the river. He waited with the patience he had learned from years of consulting rooms, the patience of a man who has asked the important question and understands that the answer belongs entirely to the other person. "I refused 2 proposals," she said. "I know. The first was a man who admired my family's connections. The second was a man who admired what he imagined I was." She turned to look at him. "You told me in our first consultation that you would not tell me what I was. You said it was outside your professional remit." "Yes. You have not, in 10 weeks, told me what I am." Her voice was measured and certain. "You have asked, consistently, what I want, what I think, what the hellebore beds require in spring." She held his gaze. "Do you know how rare that is?" "I am beginning to understand," he said quietly, "that it should not be." She looked at him for another moment, the full direct gaze, nothing managed, nothing performed. And then she said, "Yes, Dr. Hale, you may court me." The ghost of the smile developing into the genuine article. "Nathaniel." His name in her voice was so straightforwardly right that he stood beside the river in the April afternoon and felt something that was not quite any of the emotions he could name individually, but was made from all of them together, which he supposed was what happiness felt like when it arrived in the honest form and not the performed one. "Thank you," he said. "You should come to Wiltshire," she said, beginning to walk again, her voice taking on the easy cadence of a woman making practical arrangements. "At Easter. My father has said he would receive you, and the primula should be blooming, and Prewitt is terrible company, but useful for establishing the garden's recent history, and I would like to show you the cold frames." A pause. "They are better than they sound." "They sound excellent," he said, falling into step beside her. "They are." They walked back along the river in the April afternoon, the warm light doing what warm light does when a long winter has preceded it, illuminating things with a quality of surplus, as though it has been saving up, as though it has been accumulating the warmth it owed and is now paying it out in full. He came to Wiltshire at Easter. The primula was blooming, a small, improbable flower in a shade of pale lilac that had no business surviving an English winter, and had done so anyway because it had been watched over. Prewitt showed him the cold frames, with the proprietary satisfaction of a man taking deserved credit, and Nathaniel admired them sincerely, and Prewitt's opinion of him was thereby established. Baron Whitfield received him with the straightforward manner of a man who has been told something he should perhaps have understood sooner, and is proceeding without the complication of pretending otherwise. They spoke for an hour in the library, about the practice, about Bath, about a son of Whitfield's who was troubled by recurring fevers and whom Nathaniel was later able to help, and Whitfield said, at the end of it, in the tone of a man making a decision he was comfortable with, "My daughter chooses her own paths, Dr. Hale. I have been slower to understand that than I should have been. I give my blessing freely." Lady Whitfield served them all tea afterward and said very little, but her eyes moved between her daughter and the physician with an expression that was processing something, the revision, perhaps, of a prescription she had been filling for 25 years. Georgiana walked him to the garden after tea, and showed him the hellebore beds and the espalier fruit trees and the espaliered south-facing wall and the entire self-evident catalogue of a woman who had been building something real in the hours no one was counting. She showed him everything with the ease of a person showing the truth of themselves, and he received it with the attention it deserved. At the end of the kitchen garden, where the path turned back toward the house and the April evening was beginning its long, slow close, she said, "Well, there it is." "Yes," he said, "the hellebore beds. And the cold frames." He looked at them. They were, in fact, very good cold frames, precise and practical, and built by someone who knew what she was doing. And everything else. She looked at the garden, and then at him, and the smile was the whole version, the completed, genuine, entirely unperformed version that he had first seen at the corner of Milsom Street and had been accumulating the courage to deserve since. "I am not going back to London for May," she said. "I intend to stay in Wiltshire and replant the hellebore beds and continue the Oxford correspondence and be, without particular apology, entirely myself." She turned to face him. "I thought you should know." "I think," he said, "that is the correct prescription." "It is entirely my own." She held out her hand, not for leading or propriety, but the direct, deliberate gesture of an equal choosing. "Shall we go in?" He took her hand. It was the hand of a woman who had built cold frames and written botanical correspondence and argued about the corn laws and walked into a consulting room one March morning and handed a physician the truth of herself before she entirely knew she was doing it. "Yes," said Nathaniel Hale, who had prescribed the afternoon lectures and the corner of Milsom Street and the letter to Wiltshire and all the accumulated steps of a path he had not known he was building until he looked back and saw where it had led. "Let's go in." They walked back through the kitchen garden in the April evening, the primula blooming in its cold frame behind them, the hellebore beds ready for spring, the whole estate going quietly about the business of a season that had been coming for a long time and had arrived at last in full. He proposed in June in the garden among the replanted hellebores, which were not yet blooming because hellebores are not June flowers, but were established and rooted and showing the compact green confidence of plants that intend to be there for a long time. She said yes, before he finished the sentence. Not because she had not been listening, she had been listening completely, but because the answer had been accumulating since March and was simply ready. Prewitt, who had been working 20 feet away with the studied inattention of a man pretending not to have anticipated this moment, went indoors and told Mrs. Prewitt, who told the housekeeper, who told Lady Whitfield, who told Baron Whitfield, who said good with the contentment of a man whose revised understanding of his daughter had been entirely confirmed. Lady Whitfield said nothing for a moment. Then she said to her husband, in the private language of a long marriage, "He told me in Bath that she needed room." "And she did," said the Baron. "Yes." A pause. "I should have been the one to say so." He took her hand, as a man of long marriage does when there is nothing to add. "You're saying it now." Outside, in the kitchen garden, a physician's son and a baron's daughter were standing among the hellebores in the June sunshine, and neither of them was performing anything at all. The end.